In the summer of 2009, 28-year-old David Gimelfarb needed some time to relax. He was working towards his doctorate degree and was about to begin his 4th year of graduate school at the Adler School of Professional Psychology in Chicago. He was also a volunteer counselor at a community health center on the west side of Chicago. While David planned to make counseling his career, it was an inherently stressful line of work. David was also coping with the recent death of his beloved grandmother, Valentina. Valentina had helped take care of David from the time he was an infant until he started kindergarten. One of David's mother's co-workers had suggested that David look into traveling to Costa Rica. It seemed like an ideal travel destination for David. He was fluent in Spanish and was an experienced hiker. The country was full of beautiful trails for him to explore. David decided that some time away in nature would do him good before he started school again, and he planned a trip to Costa Rica just a few days before he left on it. Solo travel was not out of character for David, who had gone on a similar hiking trip to Hawaii alone within the previous year. Solo travel and spending time alone in nature also fit in with David's personality, as he tended to be more introspective and reserved. These aspects of his personality may have been tied to events in his early childhood. When he started kindergarten, he struggled to speak in English with his classmates, as he was used to speaking Russian with his parents and grandmother. David became slightly less reserved later in life when he began college at Beloit College and joined a fraternity. He had a wry sense of humor and a positive outlook on life, and was skilled at writing out his thoughts about deep and philosophical topics. David began his 6-day trip to Costa Rica on August 9th, 2009. David was his parents' only child and was in daily contact with them, whether he was at home in Illinois or traveling. He spoke to his mother Luda on August 10th from his room at the Hacienda Gachapelin in the Guanacaste province of northwest Costa Rica. David told her that the hotel was too far away from the beaches and most of the other area attractions he was interested in visiting, so he was considering moving to another hotel for part of his trip. He had met a girl at the beach and hoped to see her again. Luda wanted to know more about the girl, but David would only say that she seemed very nice. David told his mother that he would be spending the following day, August 11th, hiking in the nearby Rincon de la Vieja National Park. However, the following evening, he never called to tell her how his hike went, as she expected. By 10 p.m., she had grown concerned enough to try calling him, but he did not answer. She called the hotel's front desk the following morning, but they told her that he was not answering his room phone either. Luda insisted that hotel staff go into her son's room to see if he was all right. Several hours later, Luda received a phone call from the hotel's owner. It did not appear that David had slept in his room the previous night. His suitcase was still in the room, but the car he had rented had been located still in the parking lot of the national park where David had planned to go hiking the day before. Luda and her husband Roma immediately made plans to travel to Costa Rica to look for their son. By the time they arrived the following day, search efforts were already underway. Volunteers from the Red Cross were searching the national park on foot. Other hikers had gone missing in the park in the past, but all of them had eventually been found. Witnesses had seen David eating breakfast at his hotel on August 11th around 9 a.m., and he signed in at the national park shortly before 10 a.m. He told the park ranger on duty that he would be hiking along an easy and established loop that was not even 2 miles long, but would take him past some of the thermal mud pots that were a famous feature of the park. Initial search efforts were therefore centered around this loop. However, when David was not located, search teams grew in size and rethought their strategy. Since David was an experienced hiker, they considered that he may have changed his mind and undertaken a more difficult hike. Had he done so, he potentially opted to hike up to the crater of the park's nearby volcano. This hike would take approximately 8 hours to complete round trip, and sundown had been at approximately 6 p.m. on August 11th, meaning that if David had started the hike after 10 a.m., he would have been caught in the dark and could have potentially run into trouble. The crater itself was searched from the air, but nothing was found there. The expanded search area did not turn up any signs of David. While David's parents worked to find him in Costa Rica, his other loved ones back in the United States were also contributing to the search effort. A Facebook group called Help Find David Gimelfarb was established, and more than 1,000 people joined it within just a few days. David's parents were not receiving support from the American Embassy in Costa Rica, so members of the group were encouraged to contact their elected representatives to ask for government support for the search. David's friends also staged demonstrations in Chicago's Daily Plaza and outside local television stations, with signs describing why David was important to them, in hopes of garnering media coverage and, in turn, government support for the search effort. Their actions did finally pay off on August 19th, when the embassy sent 2 military helicopters, equipped with infrared sensors, to search the dense vegetation of the national park from the air, along with 12 soldiers from Soto Cano Air Base in Honduras. When David was not located during the search, concerns that he may have fallen victim to something more sinister than a simple hiking accident arose. Robberies within the park were not unheard of, and sections of the park were closed down in 2009 and then later in 2012 due to visitors being robbed, reportedly by individuals wielding machetes. Because the park was close to the border with Nicaragua, some of its more remote trails were known to be used by drug smugglers and poachers to move product into the neighboring country, opening up the possibility that David may have witnessed something illegal while out hiking and was killed to prevent him from reporting what he had seen. Alternatively, David could have stumbled onto private property bordering the national park and been killed by a property owner who mistook David as a poacher or smuggler encroaching on their land. The proximity of the park to Nicaragua also raised the possibility for some people that David may have voluntarily disappeared and traveled there to start a new life, as the cost of living in Nicaragua is fairly low, and immigration laws are not strictly enforced. However, circumstances, as well as David's behavior, do not support this theory. The night before he went missing, he had called a friend back in Chicago to confirm dinner plans they had for after he returned home. David was understandably sad about his grandmother's recent death, but he was not depressed or distressed at the time of his trip. According to messages David wrote and conversations he had shortly before he disappeared, his grandmother's death appears to have highlighted the finiteness of life for him. However, this seems to have inspired him not to despair or give up on his life, but rather to make the most out of the time he had. The items David left behind at his hotel also indicate that he was not planning on leaving for more than a day. Inside the safe in his room were his cell phone, his passport, and $600 in cash. David had traveled to Costa Rica with $800 in cash, and, taking into account his expenses during his travels and at the beginning of his trip, it is estimated that he would have only had around $100 with him when he went missing. It is believed David only had his backpack, a copy of his passport, water, protein bars, his journal, an inexpensive camera, and his wallet, which contained his driver's license and a few credit cards, in addition to the presumed amount of cash, with him when he began his hike. None of David's financial accounts have been accessed since he disappeared, and there is no evidence of him opening any new ones. When David's disappearance was not quickly resolved, his parents continued to visit Costa Rica year after year to continue looking for their son. Potential clues and sightings were reported to them in the following years. A stack of crayon-drawn artwork, which bore stylistic similarities to drawings David was known to create, was found in an abandoned house in Capos, which led to the Gimelfarbs hoping that whoever drew them had come in contact with their son and could provide them with information if they could be located. There have been several potential sightings of David since he disappeared, but none of them have been confirmed to be David. A local farmer reported seeing a disheveled hiker who ran away and into the woods when he approached him. In February of 2010, a disheveled man matching David's general description wandered in to a Coast Guard station. The man appeared confused and disoriented. Law enforcement contacted David's parents, but by the time they reached them, the man had left the station. The authorities had no legal reason to detain him. In October of 2012, an unkempt and confused man stumbled into a mini-mart in the coastal town of Limon, more than 200 miles away from the national park David visited on the day of his disappearance. The man could not talk, but gestured that he needed something to drink. A family there had seen a television report about David's disappearance and believed this man was him, so they took him to the local police station. The police met with the man, but soon let him go, without even taking a photograph of him. So there is no evidence besides the family's belief that the man was David. In 2013, while David's parents were in Costa Rica searching for David, they received calls and emails from someone telling them that David was being held hostage and would only be released if they paid $250,000 in ransom. They were sent a photo which was supposed to be of David, but it was too dark to tell if it was actually their son. Police ultimately determined the extortion to be a hoax, as the calls the Gimelfarbs received were found to have been made from inside of a prison. In 2018, a woman called in a tip that David may have received treatment at the National Psychiatric Hospital, but an investigator who visited the facility found no sign of anyone matching David's description. David's parents hired 4 private investigators to work on their son's case, both in Costa Rica and from the United States. On November 6, 2009, Costa Rica's Organismo de Investigación Judicial formally closed their investigation into David's disappearance, despite the lack of resolution to it. As of 2018, David's case had been transferred to the agency's Department of Criminal Investigations, based out of their office in San Jose. David's parents, Roma and Luda, continued to make yearly trips to Costa Rica around the anniversary of David's disappearance to ensure David's case continues to be covered in the local media, follow up on tips, and meet with officials from the American Embassy and the OIJ about their son's case. They continued to believe that their son was still alive. In a 2018 interview, they vowed to continue making these annual trips until they were too old to travel. Unfortunately, Roma Gimelfarb did not live to go on the next year's trip, passing away in March of 2019. He had spent 4 years battling cancer, but had not let it interfere with his travels to Costa Rica and his search for his son. Luda Gimelfarb remains active in and dedicated to the search for David. A $100,000 reward is being offered for information that reveals David's whereabouts.